So today you're going to be working on dividing with decimals. There's three types of division with decimals. First one we'll go over is dividing a whole number by a decimal. Second one is dividing a decimal by a whole number. And our last one is when we divide a decimal by a decimal. So our first problem is when we have a whole number. So remember, that's any number that does not have a decimal with it, like 9. And then we're dividing it by a decimal, so a number that has a decimal in it. So we can rewrite this as 9 divided by 1 1/10. Alright, let's show you how to do it. So our first step is going to be, we have a whole number. I'm just going to pick the whole number 72, and then we're going to divide it by a decimal. We're going to divide it by 0.6. So what this is telling me is how many times does 6/10 go into 72? Well, it's going to be a lot, because I know if this was 1, I'm just going to round it and say this is about 1. 1 would go into 72 times. So I know my answer is going to be a little bit more than 72, since 6/10 is less than 1. So how do we do this? Well, what I'm going to do is, whenever I have a decimal as my divisor, so whenever there's a decimal on the outside, what I do is I take that decimal and I move it till it's on the end. Then what I have to do is, whatever I do to the left side, I must do to the right side. So whatever I do to my outside, I must do to the inside as well. So where's my decimal? Well, my decimal is right next to that 72. I'm going to move it one spot. Do you guys know what goes in this empty area right here? It's going to be a 0. Remember, whenever we have a whole number or a decimal, we can add as many zeros as we want at the end, and it's still the same number. This is still the same as 72. So I'm going to take that decimal and move it one time over. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to rewrite my problem. So I have 6, my decimal got moved over one spot, divided by 720. If you don't believe that these will give you the same answers, you can check with a calculator as well. What we did is we multiplied this by 10, and we multiplied this by 10. So it's just like with the equations. If you do something to the left, you must do it to the right. Now we're ready to begin. 6 goes into 7 one time. I multiply and I get 6. Subtract, bring down, divide. 6 goes into 12 two times. 2 times 6 is 12. Subtract, bring down. 6 goes into 0 times. Multiply, subtract. There's nothing left to bring down, so I am finished. Alright, so my answer would be 120. Let's try another one. So I'm going to have another whole number divided by a decimal. So my whole number this time, we're going to do it with 0.11, or 0 and 11 hundredths. And the number I'm going to be dividing, we're going to say is, let's do 99 and 9/10. Alright, so what I'm going to do is I take this decimal. I see it's on the outside in my divisor, so I need to move it so it's at the right side. I've moved it one time, 2 times, and then I have a whole number on the outside. So what I do with this decimal, I move it one time, stuck again. So what I'm going to do is I move it a second time. I'm going to have this 0 here as my placeholder. I'm going to rewrite my problem, so I'm left with 11 as my divisor, divided by 9,990. And then what do I do next? Well, what I'm going to do is 11 goes into 90 times, 11 goes into 99, 9 times, multiply, subtract, bring down. 11 goes into 0 times, multiply, subtract, bring down. Now I have 11 goes into 90. Well, that's 8 times. 8 times 11, that's 88. Subtract. And I'm at the end of my division. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to take this and I'm going to put it as a fraction from 5th grade. So my remainder, that's what I have left over, is 2. And then the bottom part, my numerator, that becomes my denominator. My divisor, I'm sorry, becomes my denominator. So my final answer would be 908 and 2/11. Let's go on to our next type of problem. Divide a decimal by a whole number. So here I'm going to have a decimal on the inside. And I'm just going to divide it by a whole number. Decimal divided by a whole number. So I'm going to ask myself first, do I have any decimals as my divisor? Any decimals as my divisor? I don't. So I'm ready to begin. My first step is I'm going to bring that decimal straight up. Whenever I have a decimal in my dividend, I just bring that decimal straight up. So next I'm going to ask, how many times does 12 go into 8? Well, I know it goes into 0 times. And then I'm going to repeat my process. I multiply, subtract, bring down. You'll notice when I bring down, I don't bring that decimal down. I just have this number 84. I'm going to treat this problem just like a regular division problem. Just ignore my decimal now. How many times does 12 go into 84? Well, if you know your multiplication well, you'll know it's 7. If you don't, you might want to make a list on the side of your multiples of 12. So 12, 24, 36, 48, 60, 72, 84, and then you can count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. There's 7 groups. So I multiply 7 times 12, subtract, and there's nothing left to bring down. So here is my final answer, 0.7 or 7/10. Let's try another one. Alright, so I have a decimal divided by a whole number. So I'm going to do 0.96 or 96 hundredths divided by, let's do 12 again. There's my whole number. My very first step when I'm working with decimals and I see a decimal on the inside, so I'm going to bring it up. 12 goes into 0 0 times, multiply, 0 times 12, subtract, bring down. 12 goes into 9 0 times, multiply, subtract, bring down. I know that 12 will go into 96 8 times. I remember from my last example, 84 was when I had 7 groups of 12. If I add another 12 to it, I'm left with 96, so that would be 8 groups. Multiply, 12 times 8 is 96, subtract, and there's nothing left to bring down. So my final answer is 0.08 or 8/100ths. Alright, our last one is when we have a decimal divided by a decimal. So let's do 4.5 or 4 5/10 divided by 1.5 or 1 5/10. So my very first step is I'm going to look, do I see a decimal in my divisor? Yes, I do. So I bring that decimal over until I have a whole number. So that's 15. And then whatever I do to the outside, I must do to the inside. So I move the decimal once. So I need to move it once here. I'm going to rewrite my problem. 15 divided by 45. Since I moved those decimals one time each. Now I'm ready to begin. 15 goes into 4 0 times. Multiply. Subtract. Bring down. 15 goes into 45 3 times. Multiply. Subtract. And I'm done. There's my answer. If you don't believe that 4 5/10 divided by 1 5/10 is 3, you can grab a calculator to check. Okay, my next one is going to be the same thing, So let's practice our next one. I'm going to have, what's a good number? Let's do 0.07, so 7/100 is my divisor. And we're going to do, let's do 0.0049, or 49 thousandths. So my first step, I'm going to look, do I have a decimal in my divisor? I do, right here. So I'm going to move it till it gets to the end of my number. I move it 1 spot, 2 spots. Whatever I do to the outside, I must do to the inside. So I move it 1 spot, 2 spots. So I'm going to rewrite my problem. I'm left with 7 as my divisor, and then my decimal was moved right here. So I'm going to write, I have 0.49. Okay, now it's going to be just like these kind of problems. I have a whole number and a decimal. A whole number and a decimal. So what I do is I bring that decimal straight up, and now I just divide like normal. I know 7 goes into 0 times. Multiply, subtract, bring down. I know 7 goes into 4 0 times. Multiply, subtract, bring down. 7 goes into 49 7 times. Multiply, subtract, and there's nothing to bring down. So here's my final answer. Alright, let me give you guys a little cheat sheet before you go off and work on your Socrative and then work on your Khan Academy. So we had 3 types. Our first type was a whole number divided by a decimal. When we have a whole number divided by a decimal, we move the decimal to the end of the divisor first. And then I'll give you an example. So my first step, when I have a whole number divided by a decimal, my first step is I move that decimal to the end. I move that decimal to the end. Okay, your next one, we had a decimal divided by a what? Decimal divided by a whole number. So my first step for that is I just bring the decimal straight up. And here's my example for that one. If I have a decimal, so we'll do 1.2 divided by a whole number 6. First step, I don't have a decimal in my divisor, so what I do here is I just bring that decimal straight up, and then I just continue like a normal problem. My last one was a decimal divided by a decimal. And then what I'm going to do here is I do step 1 above, then step 2. So step 1 is I'm going to do this part first. I'm going to see if there's a decimal that I can move over. Then I do step 2 if I need to, where I bring that decimal straight up. So here's my example. If I have 0.6 as my divisor, and then I have 0.12 as my dividend, or 12/100ths. I'm going to do step 1, so I move that decimal. And then whatever I do to the outside, I must do to the inside. Going to rewrite my problem, so I'm left with 6 divided by, let me write this a little bit better, 6 divided by 1.2. Done step 1. So now step 2, it says bring the decimal straight up. And now I'm ready to begin, just like a regular problem. Alright, what you guys are going to do is you're going to go to Socrative. You're going to work on the 9 problems, I believe there are. There might be 6. You're going to finish Socrative, and then you're going to go to Khan Academy. If you need help with that, check with Ian, and good luck.